Coogs House. All right, we got kind of a jumpy, topsy-turvy show that goes all over the place. So let me just explain to you why. The first thought was that we do go in.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan, there's a hater can stop by. Please be sure to hit subscribe down below so we can get this podcast wherever you get your podcast each and every day. That'll help make us your first listen of the day. Once you subscribe, we should pop up on your news feed. Just hit listen each morning when you're turning on your phone or other device. If you're on YouTube, thank you for tuning back in the YouTube channel. It's good to see you again. Once we get up to 250 subscribers, we're kind of solidly over that 150 mark. We had a big weekend. I think Roll Tide kind of rolled into our mentions a little bit more back. And we have, remember, when we get over 250 subscribers, one second. We're going to be giving away one of these Marcus Sasser t-shirts. The artist came on for a bonus episode last week. It's a cool retro vintage graphic tee. I kept calling it like an old band shirt. He didn't like that so much. And so make sure we get 250 subscribers. To get that, you get to hit subscribe, so we get 250 subscribers, and then be commenting on videos. The more likely you are to comment, the more likely you are to win the shirt. If you listen to this whole video with a bunch of things about the Cougars and have nothing else to say, why don't you tell us if you like sweet or salty popcorn? All right, so today's episode, like I mentioned, is kind of jumpy, and I'm sorry, it just got a bunch of different things to cover. The first segment's going to be looking at Houston versus North Carolina A&T, because on Tuesday night, we're playing them in basketball, and it's kind of got a lot of symbolism around the basketball game, and it's also a chance for Houston to kind of get back on track. So we got a lot of things to cover in the first segment. The second segment is going to be kind of looking at the AP and coaches top 25 polls and kind of seeing what the fallout is to that for Houston after a tough loss to Alabama over the weekend in basketball. And the third and final segment is going to be looking at, frankly, I'm sure you've heard this point on other shows, but the impact of what's going on with Mike Leach and kind of the impact he's had on the University of Houston's big sport coaching hires, and both Dana Holgorsen and Kelvin Sampson. That's going to be a little tangential as the third segment, but it's going to be, I think, really, really important. And frankly, it's kind of a sad story. So we're going to get to that at the end. It's hard not to get to that at some point in looking at both Holgorsen and Sampson. But first, let's talk about North Carolina A&T. This is a part of the Coaches versus Racism series of games across college basketball, kind of this middle section of the week. And when asked about that, Coach Sampson said that he wants to keep this idea alive. Racism has not gone away. And just the idea that you can have these kinds of games and have someone walking by a TV at a sports bar, at a whatever, that just hears it and thinks about it. And actually, if there's any chance at all that you can make someone think about it, it's worth playing these kinds of games. He's comfortable talking about it. He's very quick to point out. And obviously, if you know his history, his father fought the KKK in North Carolina. I mean, he's got very, very legitimate reason to be comfortable talking about it. He's been around being comfortable talking about fighting racism and being anti-racist has been part of his whole life. But he also mentioned that he gets to coach against coaches that he really, really respects. The organization, this Coaches Against Racism thing, was put on by Daryl Wood, who he mentioned he coached many, many moons ago. And it kind of piggybacks off of the George Floyd momentum and fighting racism from a couple summers ago. He gets coached against Byron Smith this week. And then he also mentioned that he's in the past gotten coached against Johnny Jones from just up the street, and how those are kind of guys that he really respects, both because of the fight that they fight and the places that they do their work. He was really, really quick to point out too that North Carolina A&T ain't some scrubby team, right? This is not, it is an HBCU. It's a little bit like smaller school and division as far as the finances go compared to Houston. And Houston's frankly usually fighting those uphill battles against the Alabamas, Virginias in the world. But he said this is not some scrub group of kids. This is a really good, talented basketball team. They got a guard from Oklahoma State who transferred back, and he mentioned that they've already beaten UNC Greensboro on a neutral site court. That's the kind of team UNC Greensboro is, that you could very likely see in the tournament more years than not, right? And frankly, it was interesting to hear him talk about that being this strength in these smaller schools being a result of the transfer portal. And we don't think about it a whole lot in Houston because, frankly, as Sampson has accurately pointed out, they don't lose a lot of guys to the transfer portal. So we don't think about people using it as a chance to go up or down divisions. Now, Houston's got a couple guys, right? Quentin Grimes came home from Kansas. It looks like we're going to redshirt Malik Wilson this year, but he came in from Texas Tech. We've obviously utilized it to bring kids in, but we don't lose a whole lot of kids to the transfer portal. And while I could, pat Sampson and his culture and all of those things on the back, what's interesting to hear Sampson talk about in relation to playing these smaller schools is that it really levels the playing field out, because you're having kids that were at one point, we all assumed that they were 3 and 4 and 5-star kids ending up at secondary and tertiary institutions at relative to where they were going initially. And that's how you get things like a talented North Carolina A&T team. That's how you get things like the Kent State game against Houston a couple weeks ago, right? That's how St. Mary's continues to build a program. And what's interesting there is, like, Coach was quick to point out, like, the Kent State game, I think everyone gave Houston a hard time about, but then they try to beat Gonzaga, right? Like, they played Gonzaga tooth and nail, right? St. Mary's, like, we're like, oh man, like, we struggled in the first half against St. Mary's. They beat San Diego State, like, not that far. Like that's a team that knocked off #1 Gonzaga a year ago. Like, these are programs, these smaller programs, the transfer portal, the NILs, and those kinds of things are kind of like evening out the playing field as a whole. Now, if I'm looking at what I think Houston's got to do to win this game, it's show up and play basketball, because Houston's best and North Carolina A&T's best. Houston's best is much better. That doesn't mean that North Carolina A&T's best couldn't beat Houston on any given day, but on both teams playing their best day, they shouldn't. This guy Cam Woods, though, that Coach alluded to, he's a strong guard. He's at 6'2", 6'3", and I think the interesting thing here is that he is a big-time shooting guy. He's not like Steph Curry off the bounce shooting guy, but he is a 38% three-point shooter and shoots 8 of them a game, right? Like, he is going to get a lot of threes up. And frankly, that was kind of the way Alabama went about it over the weekend. And so seeing how Houston bounces back on keeping those guys from getting out, Alabama did it by driving the lane, kicking out for open threes. Can Houston learn from their mistakes and kind of build off of that to the Tuesday? Will be interesting. The other guy I want to say to watch out for is a kid named Marcus Watson. That's the Oklahoma State guy that Coach alluded to in his presser. He also then went to New Mexico State, if my research serves me correctly. And to be fair, he played at New Mexico State, where he was a redshirt guy at Oklahoma State. But since he joined North Carolina A&T, he's a double-digit scorer consistently. And frankly, he's got Power 5 size, speed, athleticism. That's why he ended up Oklahoma State in the first place. 6'6", 215, got a lot of good bounce. It'll be interesting to see how Houston does guarding him. He's an interesting matchup. I think he'll draw Tremont Mark, whereas the other kid, Cam Woods, would probably draw Jamal Shed, just based on size things. That is to say that that's what I would assume happens. I guess, obviously I'm open to other interpretations. We'll see what Coach draws up. I trust him, but that's what I would assume happens. I think that this is going to be a nice little tune-up game, though, for Houston to kind of get back on track going into Virginia next weekend. The biggest things that obviously become of this: feeling confident, playing well, playing healthy, and overall just feeling good going into the weekend. Because frankly, if you can get out of the Virginia weekend with a win, you feel really, really good about yourself over the holidays. Speaking of the holidays, let's talk a little bit about what you're going to get your folks for the holidays, because I know that I think about, what am I going to get my dad? My dad's impossible to buy things for, because frankly, A, he don't want a lot of stuff, and B, when he wants some stuff, he goes and gets some stuff. But the stuff that you can get your dad or whomever that they might not just go get on their own, or frankly, if they go get on their own, they will very quickly run out of steaks, right? This is insane. Omaha Steaks is cutting prices up to 50% site-wide to make sure that you're the gift-giving hero that you always wanted to be. The holidays are here. You can achieve gift-giving greatness when you give the perfect gift of aged, tender, and delicious Omaha Steaks. There's everything you need that's for a gift that's simply perfect. It's in an assortment of mouth-watering favorites that are delicious butcher-cut filet mignons, air-chilled boneless chicken. They got juicy burgers. I got the menu pulled up right here. I'm getting a little mouth-watering as I'm doing this. Even easy-to-prepare comfort meals that are already ready in a flash. That's more like a gift for me, though. Don't wait. Order today. You can beat the shipping rush. Go to omahasteaks.com. Use promo code LOCKEDON at checkout. Omaha Steaks is a gift from the heart, a gift that will be remembered with every unforgettable bite. Order the complete confidence today, knowing that you're getting the very, very best. Visit omahasteaks.com. Take advantage of the 50% site-wide, plus use promo code Locked On to get an extra $40 off your order. Minimum order may be required. All right, now I think what's interesting in looking at the basketball program is obviously coming off of the Alabama game. We were kind of looking at the top 25, looking at like what things are going to happen. Obviously, had Houston won that game, they've been the number one team again, all over again, but they didn't. And I think everyone's like, oh man, like Alabama's beat we beat the number one team in the country twice. They're going to leapfrog us. There's a couple of very talented undefeated teams that were originally behind Houston. They'll probably stay in front of Houston. And so where will Houston fall? And so the AP poll was the first of two polls. Well, I want to say the first of two polls that came out, but at least I'll just say the first one that got alerted to me. And what's interesting is that the poll went in the AP poll, Purdue number 1, Virginia number 2, UConn number 3. I think we all kind of foresaw some shakeup of those three teams happening, both because Sampson has said as much thus far, and B, if you've gotten a chance watching those teams, you knew it was coming, and C, we all kind of thought that, man, if we can stay undefeated and play in Virginia, it might be like 1 versus 2. The AP poll then had Alabama leapfrogging Houston to 4. Houston came in at number 5, which means they're right on the cusp of that 4 spot. I'll tell you why that's important in a second. Then Tennessee 6, Texas 7, Kansas 8, Arizona 9, Arkansas 10, Baylor 11, Duke 12. Now, I go by numbers divisible by 4 because that's kind of how you do seeding when the tournament comes out. And it's obviously not just the AP poll doing seeding. There's a whole lot of other things going into the selection committee and all those kinds of things. But Houston being 5th in the AP poll kind of hints at, just historically, they would be at the fringe of whether they get a 1 seed or a 2 seed, right? Because the 1 seeds would theoretically be 1 through 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, if they're all regionally applicable and da-da-da-da-da, right? The 2 seeds would then be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, playing in the opposite order, akin to your snake draft kind of thing. Again, if regionality and that kind of stuff played out well. What this would do is, because both Alabama and Houston are Southern-ish, is it might actually would like theoretically have Houston and Alabama playing again in March, which would be fascinating to see the growth of both teams. Both Alabama and Houston feel relatively young, and where do those teams end up by mid-March, right? Nate Oates is kind of a younger up-and-comer. Kelvin Sampson did take a hiatus from college basketball, but has been coaching this game at the Division I college level or higher for longer than I've been alive, right? And so I think that's really, really important to look at. The other thing I'll say too is, what is the AP valuing here? Purdue is the top end. They've played 10 games, they're 10-0. Virginia, I thought, has had a more impressive run, but it's only 8-0 and they're number 2. Houston's 9-1, they're number 5. Notable things here, though, is if Houston's really going to go to the Big 12 and make some noise next year, right behind them are Texas, Kansas, and Baylor in that top 11, 12 spots. The other thing is that if you were paying attention to the more national news, and if you're not, I should recommend going over to Locked On College Basketball, where A, I'm giving a segment on Houston, and B, this Chris Beard story is getting a little bit more explained. But Chris Beard, head coach at University of Texas, Austin, got in, I'll say, some trouble. It looks like there's potential felony, assault at home. Didn't necessarily which family member, but definitely said a family member. All that's really icky and ugly and gross. And frankly, we're hoping that whatever family member that is okay. But as this is a sports show, I do feel obliged to say, it's worth pointing out that Texas could kind of stumble here. Honestly, who knows how long Chris Beard is out, if he's out forever, right? There's certainly a world where it's like, no, you committed what might be a felony, you're done, right? That would theoretically take kind of Texas putting pressure on Houston kind of out of the picture there, right? Which would, kind of ease up things a little bit. The other thing is that when you look at regions, not to look too far ahead to March, but Houston and Texas would probably both be in the same region theoretically, if you're really truly doing it like that. And so, we'll see how those kinds of things shake out. You could also see, anyway, we'll do a Big 12 show when we're going into the Big 12 next season, but the impacts and implications that are super, super huge. The coaches poll is only slightly different The interesting thing about the coaches poll, though, that my Roll Tide people that came and found the show over the weekend, I think will be a little bit upset about, is the USA Today coaches poll had Houston at 4, Purdue, Virginia, UConn 1, 2, 3, Houston at 4, Alabama at 5, Kansas at 6, Tennessee 7, Texas at 8. Now, that's the same 8, really, truthfully, all the way down to 12. The same 12 teams, just a slightly different orders. And I think it's fascinating that Houston fell to 4, but did not get leapfrogged by Alabama. And this is not an Alabama show, and I'm going to take it, and I'm going to enjoy it. But, man, if I were an Alabama fan and I beat Houston and did not get to leapfrog Houston, I'd be a little pissed. So we'll see what comes out of that. All in all, though, I think it's interesting to see that like Houston has clearly gained the respect of people across the country. And as you and I talked about on Monday's show, in recapping the Houston-Alabama game, clearly there's some evidence to say, because Houston got up by 15 in that game, double digits, smothering defense, etc., and really kind of drove Alabama's starters a little crazy. Alabama had to completely mix up what they did after that and do stuff that wasn't on tape. He's one quite ready for, and Houston's adjustments didn't quite work as well as you'd hope for them to. There's a world where that team that was up by 15 is the entire 40 minutes of basketball, and thus Houston's undefeated. Like, people are noticing that aspect as well. Like, oh, this team, yes, they lost, but they shot free throws poorly down the stretch, and they were up by 15 at one point. Like, there's also a lot of talent here because Houston did not fall that far. And again, the coaches poll still had Houston above Alabama. Now, that could be some, people upset about, maybe there's Auburn people out there upset about Alabama or whatever. But on the whole, I think that's worth looking at. I think it's really, really key to think about. As far as other things in the top 25 to look at, if you're Houston, this is the painful part. Or I guess losing was also the painful part. But after the Virginia game, in neither AP poll do you see a future Houston opponent. In the AP poll, I said in neither AP poll. In neither poll do you see a future Houston opponent. Memphis received the most votes, and assuming that would make them like 26th in the AP poll. And in the coaches poll, they're a little further down the line. You got Marquette, Iowa State, Iowa, West Virginia all ahead of them. So theoretically, Houston, unless Memphis goes on a run and then launch themselves into that top 25 to 2019-18 area, Houston's last chance to have a top 25 win might be this upcoming Saturday. And that's really, really frustrating for, as I spoke about with Andy on Locked On College Basketball a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of pressure on these smaller, I want to say smaller conference, but American Athletic Conference has a smaller budget than the Big 12 does. There's a lot of pressure on these teams that doesn't seem fair because realistically, Houston's seeding might be decided before Christmas. And that means that you don't get to be a young team making early season mistakes. Whereas if you were playing the Big 12, sure, you got a big game against Virginia this Saturday, but you would play Kansas, Texas, Baylor. In the Big 12 SEC thing, you might get someone like Kentucky or Auburn. And then you'd also get to play TCU and Iowa State. And those kinds of teams that are all flirting with the top 25 or in the top 25 just by being in the conference. And Houston doesn't get that. And so that just puts this crazy big weight on what they're doing this Saturday. And I'm just not sure that's fair. Speaking of being unfair and weight, I know a lot of us, it's the holidays, chocolate's a big, big deal. And it's just not fair that chocolate is bad for you. They're going to be some doctor, dark chocolate. The amount of chocolate I like to eat is not good for you. However, Built Bar is the way to go and to fix this craving. And I'm telling you, this is my favorite one to read of all of these things to read, because Built Bar is a thing that we've been using in my household for a really, really long time. You got to try this thing that I'm talking about with Built Bar. They have a cookie dough topper, a brownie bar, coconut brownie topper bar, white chocolate peppermint granola. They got a bunch of different various. They taste like candy bars, but they are protein bars. If you haven't tried Built Bars before, they're literally the best tasting protein bars ever built. Pun intended. they are revolutionizing nutrition as we know because they use 100% real chocolate on the outside, 17 grams of protein, shockingly low sugar and calories. Most are just 130 calories overall, 17 grams of protein and 130 calories with real chocolate on them. Not that fake crap you get put in your mouth that gets stuck to your teeth or whatever. Just sink your teeth in that first bite and it can change your life forever. I'm not kidding. There'll be a time before you tried Built Bars. There'll be a time after you've had Built Bars. The magical, wonderful time after is be trying new flavors. Mine, during the fall, I like the pumpkin because I'm super basic. But these days, I'm going with the, it's like a mud pie. It's like a brownie with a bunch of like dusting on it. It's really, really good. Again, it is one of the 130 calories, 17 grams of protein bars. I'm telling you, it's a great, great breakfast if you're on the go like myself. Built, you got to try this. Get 15% off your order right now using promo code LOCKEDON15 at built.com. All right, so the last segment here, I think, is going to feel like initially, if you're looking at like just the segment breakdown or whatever, like, Parker's going to talk about Mike Leach in the third segment. And admittedly, as we're recording this, the news in Mississippi for Mike Leach. Mike Leach is head football coach, Mississippi State, has also coached at Washington State and Texas Tech. He was the offensive coordinator in a couple of different places, including Oklahoma. Worth pointing out that I guess technically Mike Leach has not passed on yet, but it sounds like he had a really, really awful, I'm reading, heart attack on Sunday night, and was in critical condition all day Monday to the point where I don't know. It sounded like they were asking people to come say their last words to Coach Leach. And, I think that there's a part of me that wants to point out, like, as a coach myself, like, I take a lot of what I do from Coach Leach. He was kind of successful because he did things off the wall and different and broke convention, right? He invented the air raid with Coach Al Mummy at Iowa Wesleyan University. And at Iowa Wesleyan University in the late 80s, they were a school that had won 3 or less games 21 of the previous 40 seasons before Mummy and Leach got there, in the lowest division of college football. And they showed up and they put in this offense, kind of crazy offense, pass the ball every play, side to side, not necessarily even down the field. Modern version would call it the air raid. And they went 10-2. And from there, they kind of built a program. They kind of started bouncing around college football. It kind of went their separate ways. But the air raid coaching tree family is ever expanding, ever expanding. Coach Leach got to Oklahoma as the OC. Eventually got the Texas Tech head coaching job. He locked a kid in a closet and then got sent to Washington State. Went from Washington State to Mississippi State for the SEC kind of job. And frankly, on the way, did a lot of talking about card tricks, magic tricks, pirates. I, for one, would defend the pirate metaphor, the swing your sword and like sharpening your blade, aka your tools, aka your craft, and then using it like you've been taught to use it and doing it as a team. All those things were metaphors he used to constantly tie these weird, eclectic things back to football. And now he's going to be gone. Anyway, I think that it's worth pointing out at Houston that like the programs we know and love would probably not be the same and more of the impact of Coach Mike Leach on college football. Bluntly, we talked about that team at Iowa Wesleyan that went 10-2 that kind of started this revolution of air raid passing and those kinds of things. A star wide receiver on the football team was a kid named Dana Holgorsen. The same Dana Holgorsen that is the head coach of our University of Houston Cougars. He's at the start, the implementation of this thing. Holgorsen would follow Mummy and Leach then to Valdosta State, where they would implement this at a much bigger level than Vision. He then got to go with Leach. Eventually, he met back up with Leach, I should say, at Texas Tech, initially as a wide receivers coach, and eventually a co-offensive coordinator with Sonny Dykes. The same Sonny Dykes who was taking TCU to their college football playoff in his first year on campus at right there in Fort Worth, right? These systems have consistently continued to work and push the envelope as what is normal in college football. And Holgorsen was there at the start of it. And Holgorsen was there at the start of it with Leach. And, Holgorsen released a very, very sweet tweet. You can go look it up. But he basically called him a mentor and a friend. Leach was a relatively young head coach when they met in the late 80s. The big thing to me is that this air raid was all based on, and this is a Leachism, but could be a Holgersenism if you hear it here. You screw with the defense by screwing with formations, not by screwing with place. Right? Like that reads like something Holgorsen would say, but it's something Leach said. They're very, very much connected. And frankly, their offenses are a whole lot alike. Now, Leach has had more team success. We remember the 2008 Texas Tech team that had a chance to make a national title after upsetting UT Austin at the last second, the Crabtree catch, right? As soon as he got the Big 12, Coach Leach won the Pac-12 Coach of the Year twice in his 4 seasons there. I'm sorry. He won 2 different National Coach of the Year's award in the same year, that 2008 year at Tech, I should say. He's had success throughout his time on the football field. And again, change football, I'd argue, for the better. It's a more aesthetically appealing game in a lot of ways. And also it's just a more creative game. It's not just like ISO dive, toss, ISO dive, toss. For reference to how much things changed, before Mike Leach was a head coach, the leading passer in college football was Mike Perez of San Jose State, who threw for just over 3,000 yards. This season, throwing for that just roughly the exact same amount, would put him outside the top 20. It's just commonplace to do the kinds of things now that were eccentric and crazy back then. We saw, at Houston, we saw our own pass happy offenses, right? With the Andre Ware's of the world and those kinds of things, right? Ty Detmer obviously set the world on fire at BYU as well shortly thereafter. But all this stuff started with Leach and a wide receiver kid named Holgorsen and a little kid named Holgorsen on his staff. And for all the things I give Holgorsen a hard time for at Houston, I want him to call this, not that. Not that the scheme doesn't work. The scheme is beautiful as far as like spacing and getting you on, and where you can't do these kinds of things well, and screwing with the defense by screwing with formations, right? Do I will see him run things like quarterback power with the backside option more? Yes, I scream for that all season long. But do I want the backside option to be the stuff that he's implementing? Yes, absolutely. I want all the same things. All those things I thought was interesting to see. And frankly, the innovator of all, the guy that sparked it all, the guy that thought about it different, the guy who never played college football but changed college football forever, is Mike Leach. And it sounds like he may be leaving us. My last note here on Leach, and one that I did not know until I was actually doing research on the North Carolina A&T game, I had not put together that Leach was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma when Kelvin Sampson was the head basketball coach at Oklahoma. And apparently they were also really good friends. Leach said, so in talking to the media on Monday, Sampson said that Leach would come sit in the side corner of the radio shows at his own empty table with a bottle of wine and just let him have it, like just heckle him while he was doing radio shows, which is like the most Mike Leach thing ever, to heckle your basketball coach you're having a good time with. Sounds like in Norman, with this being a small, I guess you're close to Oklahoma City, but being a small town, those guys all really knew each other really, really well. They'd all talk trash to one another, and Leach would give him a hard time, as Leach would give Sampson a hard time, while Sampson was giving callers a hard time about not knowing what they were talking about. And he said, "Who said you know what you're talking about?" And those kinds of conversations were happening between these two in their respective sports, coaching geniuses, right? And Leach said, Sampson said of Leach that whatever you've heard about him, he is that guy. He is the pirate guy. He is the card trip guy. He is the weird rambling metaphors guy. And the press conference happened Monday afternoon, and I think it's worth pointing out that Sampson had heard some of what was going on with Leach, and was very, very visibly shaken and broken up when, after giving his own response, he asked the reporter Duarte of the Houston Chronicle, "What have you heard latest?" And Duarte said the same news I told you guys, that it sounds like he's people are saying the final goodbyes. And Sampson was just destroyed. I mean, had his head in his hands, gathered himself, in the press conference, that was rough. And if you're looking for the kind of impact this guy's had on Sampson or Holgerson or college football or college coaching or just the way we think about sports in general, is that it's this fun thing that is supposed to be creative and spunky and quirky and different. And there's multiple ways to skin a cat. And Leach did all of that very, very well, and changed the sport forever. And frankly, Houston is still reaping the benefits of that and probably will forever, until someone invents something more revolutionary than the forward pass, right? I mean, that's not that college football's got to be the main thing all the time. Not that sports had to be the main thing all the time, although this is, Locked On Podcast Network. We talk about sports all the time. Leach showed that all those things are fascinating and that you can push that like forward thought into things, and it doesn't have to be done the same way it's been done all the time. Obviously, I'm kind of beat up about Mike Leach too. I'm not, I was not a Washington State Cougars fan by any stretch, or a Mississippi State fan. Certainly, I rooted for Tech in the sense that I like to see the state of Texas do very well, and that Michael Crabtree team was fun. My dad grew up in Lubbock, I guess. So I would be lying if I didn't say that it was like nice to see them do okay. But man, it's a hard one to swallow, and I'll be talking about it a lot on Twitter and Instagram, all those kinds of things. My family and I were texting about it on Monday afternoon, evening, like, oh my God, can you believe this is happening? If you want to talk about it too, or you want to talk about college sports, you want to just talk about the North Carolina A&T game at some point on Tuesday, make sure you hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Painsworth512. It's PAINSWORTH512 on Twitter, Instagram, and all your various social media handles. Happy to talk Cougs, Leach, Rockets, Astros, whatever you would like to talk about. Sneakers. I'd rather talk about sneakers a lot than famous football coaches passing away. It's hard to swallow. Always make sure you find me on Twitter to talk about those kinds of things. If you're looking for a second listen, I'm going to say go listen to Locked On College Basketball, because I have a segment on there, and because they're looking at a lot of the same kind of stuff we talked about here on this show today. Thank you so much for listening to Locked On Cougs, making us your first listen today. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Go Cougs.